Hey guys, welcome to Irish Medieval History this week in our nice little chat. Shane Kent is back with us from University College Cork. Last week, if you haven't watched it, we were covering Rome and Ireland and the interaction Rome and Ireland had during the 5th century. This week we move on to a new topic, which is Ireland moving into Christian periods and its whole interaction with Rome and stuff once again. And Shane, we were talking about earlier on, is going to navigate us through the mess of the 5th, 6th and 7th century and just the whole mess of the late antiquity. Yeah, I said it perfectly there, guys.
Yep. Yeah, you did. Very good.
I know. Give me a pat on the head.
Yeah, pat in the head, Phil. Well done.
So, Shane, would you like to take us off there on our little adventure through the dark woods?
Yep.
That is the late
antiquity. We'll call this a colossal and utter mess. So, from last week, guys, I know I kind of jumped back and forth, but basically, I will assume now that we established the fact that there was contact, be it direct, indirect, and of an inconsistent manner, between Rome and the classical world from the 1st to the 3rd century. In between all that, we're now going to get to a very delightful topic called the Military Anarchy, which is when the empire goes. And the reason that is because during the Military Anarchy, we actually get a lot more confirmed contact with Ireland and Rome and Britain. And it also kind of links up with, I mentioned it earlier on, the earliest Christian saints. So just to scooch forward a little bit, Bishop Palladius's famous note about sending a bishop over to those Irish who believed in Christ.
Yeah.
Now, highlight that one, who believed in Christ. Mm-hmm. That implies that there was a community of Christians living long before that, because you don't just you only sending a bishop if the population is big enough that you can actually organize, or you need to organize it on a larger scale. So this bit is going to be more my own musings, so you can take them apart as you wish. So we get to after the deaths of Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius from the 80s to the 160s is basically the Roman Golden Age. Everything's cool, money's flowing in, relative peace, the emperors kick ass. So we get to Marcus Aurelius, the last one of them. So if you know Gladiator, played famously by Richard Harris, you see the slow disintegration of the army and then of the civilian, we'll call it civil servants. His son Commodus is basically starts shooting the government as it was from the legs up. After that, you get the year of the 5 emperors, where amongst other things, they were bidding for the emperorship in front of the Praetorian Guard. It was literally being auctioned off. So what happened to kick all that off was, and there is a reason behind all this. The Roman imperial system had no defined acts of succession. Nothing. What would happen? The tradition developed where an emperor would adopt someone who would be his son, and he would rule. They actually rarely ever picked a direct bloodline. And so that's one reason that was suggested, that when emperors decided to pick their son as a direct successor. But basically it's a combination of, I said last week that the violence, the emperor controlled the violence of the state. More violence was forced upon it. Lack of money, in the ancient world, and even up till 1960s, it was commodity money. Money was based on how much silver was in your coinage. The more devaluing you get, if you devalue your coinage more and more, you got to pay for more and more. That will cause inflation, which causes more chaos. So anyway, we skip through past Marcus Aurelius very briefly. We get to the Military Anarchy. From 235 to 285, there was a 20 or 30 year stretch where you had 50 emperors killing each other off like weeds. And what you get, and the reason for that was the whole idea. How should I put it? It's a tough one, because like the idea of the emperor picking military commanders, you have to remember one important thing: the legates were not professional soldiers. They were basically amateurs. Some of them were very good, some of them were crap. And then there were more enemies being fought. So there's an old boxing trope where if you fight the same guy too often, he learns your tricks. This is what's happening with the barbarian peoples all along the Danubian limes. They're getting better organized. This is because, obviously, over hundreds of years, you're in contact with the Roman world. You're learning some of their stuff, and you're getting not coalitions, but a coming together of peoples. Yeah. So the Alemanni would be probably the most famous ones when you get to the 3rd century. They're not a people per se. They're probably a confederation of peoples. Now, you probably have that. I know we mentioned it earlier with the Inail. I'd say that is your most likely scenario. It's not a tribe per se. It is probably a coalition of like-minded people under one term. And this is what you get all along from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th into the 4th century, is more barbarians coming in, either wanting to live in the empire or raiding the empire, and the entire imperial system breaks down. Now, I know we're not talking about the military per se, but from the 200s to the 400s, the traditional legion is breaking apart, because moving 5,000 men from one part to another is expensive in man, material, food, money. So the legion stays in one spot, and it's broken into smaller bits called vexillations, and they are sent to the frontiers. And over time, that develops into the field and mobile armies that you might know of in the late army. But the more legions you had, as the legion numbers go up, so from 1480 to near 200 AD, it was always hovering at about 25 to 28 legions. It goes more and more and more. The more soldiers you have, the more money you need to pay them. If you need more money, you got to get the silver from somewhere. So you devalue your currency to pay them, which would also increases inflation. If inflation is increased, the economics of the day goes downhill. So between all of this mess, where are the Irish popping up? You actually start seeing, I actually was reading about this, and there's a couple of Britannia reports, and the first mention of them would be roughly the crisis of the 3rd century, so the late 280s, maybe even earlier, the 290s. So you start getting them more and more frequently. Now, that doesn't...
Are these just raids randomly, or are they hitting specific areas, or is it just trade? What's going on like?
Honestly, it could be anything. Shush, cat. Shush. Sorry, the cat's a little sick and it's quite late. It's probably not too dissimilar situation that's happening on the Danubian frontier. You have Ireland probably in contact with the classical world. Again, to use an archaeological joke, evidence of lack of evidence does not make for evidence of absence. So, what was it? Okay. So they're probably smelling blood in the proverbial water. So because if you have rampant inflation, your money is worthless. If your money is worthless, it's kind of devolving back to the late Republic, early Empire thing, where a military strongman, and that's what's happening. The barrack emperors start popping up. So hard, grizzled veteran soldiers from the Balkans are becoming emperor far more frequently. The senatorial class that used to be governing, used to be the military men, are gone. They're now professional soldiers, and the whole gravitas of the emperor is not based in Rome anymore. It's based where the army is. And the last Severan emperor, Severus Alexander, on his deathbed, famously said, "Pay the soldiers well and damn everyone else." So So there's a kind of like, the more soldiers you have in the field, the more money you got to find. If you have no silver to cover the cost, you got to find it from somewhere, which is why the basement of the economy happens. You got to find the more, which again drives up the prices of everything. So it's basically a colossal mess. So you get to the 280s and 290s, you see the Scotti and the Atticoti popping up. Now, I know you meant the Scotti, I have a guess, are not a people. They're probably a confederation. Because again, you're a Roman writer, you're sitting there in the provinces, you're kind of going, who are these clowns? Oh yeah, we'll just call them Scotti, blah, blah, blah. In between all this, you've the Christian religion popping up. Now, okay, what's so different about the Christian religion? From the late 1st, 2nd, and the 3rd century, you had the imperial cult, which was a mechanism used to give loyalty to the state. Now, as I mentioned with Roman religion, Romans didn't give a damn who you worshipped, as long as you tipped your hat to the. And this is what I mean by tipping your hat to the emperor. There'd be these quasi, semi, full-time shrines to the emperor, built independently. This wasn't like a state official thing. And then the locals you'd do your sacrifice, tip your hat to the emperor, and you're done. Christians obviously would refuse to do this. And this was considered bad juju because the Romans believed in Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods. Romans are very traditionalist in their religious practice. These are the gods we worshipped, gave us this empire, gave us this peace. Why should we change? There's no need to change. But what Christianity gave that pagan religions did not, now this is not meant to be a religious discussion, by the way, but this is the key difference. It gave a sense of community, a sense of fellowship. It looked after its members. Ancient societies were amoralistic. God's up there. Doesn't matter what you do. It's the state defined morality. And it grew up with the empire, and it started taking the mechanisms of Roman governance for itself. To this day, vicars, vicarii are late Roman divisions of the provinces. The Pope, one of his titles is still Pontifex Maximus. But it gave a sense of unity, and that was the one major thing that the Roman state did not have. So we get to the 200s, as I mentioned, and unfortunately I couldn't find my notes on this. There is evidence to suggest that there were a collection of Christian saints coming into Ireland from the 200s to 300s AD, which goes back to, you have a bishop being sent in the 400s, which would imply you had population there, probably 50, 100, maybe older, the lads converting them, selling the Christian faith. And then as time went on, a massive population grew. So that's the biggest contribution that the classical world gave to Ireland, was the church. And what the church gave, most importantly, was a sense of unity, because it superseded the clan, the tribe, the state. So again, if we're looking this in a military context, a sense of belonging is a very powerful thing. So if you're like these local tribesmen up north and you're going to the army, you're dealing with people that come from Syria, North Africa, Russia, from every country within the European Union and beyond. You probably get this unconscious idea that, wait a minute, the army can do this, the church, this Christian God who belongs to everyone. And that's the other thing. Unlike most pagan religions, Christians took everyone, man, woman, child. On contrary to popular opinion, didn't give a shit what race you were. Didn't matter.
Support when it comes down to Ireland and what Christianity did for Ireland. I can sort of see where you're coming at, because when St.Patrick does come to Ireland, in his actual writing, I know there's a lot of folklore that appears later on, especially around the 7th century, the 8th century, etc. But first off, I can see where you're coming from, because you can see that with women. Straight away in St. Patrick's own writing, a lot of women feel connected with St. Patrick, and he does have a lot of followers there. So it does show that there's a failure in sense of community when it comes down to women, why women jump in so quickly. However, on saying that, later laws and stuff, it seems that sense of community for Ireland does seem to come out of the laws and stuff, so I can kind of agree but at the same time disagree. The problem is I can't fully argue it, just because the Brehon law and stuff we do have does come from the Viking Age and upwards, so we do think that we do see roots and stuff coming from the 6th century, but the actual writing that we have right now does come from the Viking Age and up. What's up, Michael?
I can add to that in what I perceive as a natural progression. Again, when you first had St. Peter's Church and these slaves becoming Christian and these communities and everything, and then you say the women jump in Ireland, and that they are really and they are for a long time, the pushers of the church. They are the great patrons. If you look at all the great patrons of early churches and stuff, they are often, especially like in England, Anglo-Saxon princesses and wives and so and so. But it's not very long before the one thing that it almost, the chain has said here, that it gets rid of these tribe clan connection. It's more about unity before the clans muscle in and change that church.
Yeah.
And you start seeing those court families, those heirs, those side branches of royal families taking over the church.
Yeah.
And it starts to almost fall back into old habits, but with a new face. And I think that's where you sort of, over the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, you start to see this progression.
Well, to be honest with you, my brain is still kind of digesting what Shane said there. Because at the same time, I do actually agree with Shane, because my brain, as it's digesting now, does remember the fact that when Christianity does come into Ireland, it does quite literally become the centre of society, and that's the monastic settlements. A lot of people will tell you that the idea of cities come in with the Vikings. That's not entirely true. They actually come in with Christianity. It's a different form of city. When cities come into Ireland originally in the start of the early medieval period, for the Irish, as they're referred to as the Scotti at this period point, their idea of city is civilized, and so their idea of civilized is the monastic settlement in the center and a bishop, and their idea, if the bishop's in the center, that means they're connected to Rome, and Rome is the center of civilization. So that means that all these monastic settlements are cities in their point of view. Now, from a modern perspective, our view of a city is completely different, but to the Irish of the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, all the way up to the coming of the Vikings, their idea of a city is a monastic settlement, because for them, city means civilized, and civilized means connected to Rome. And that means, and Columbinus has that in his letter, that if we're connected to the source of the water, that means we're connected to the source of the center of Rome. And the center of Rome, you will find that in every single monastic settlement in Ireland at the period, which for them are the cities. You find right there, bang in the middle, is a church, and if it has a bishop in the middle of it, that's it. That's them sorted,
Well, the thing is, it's only something. So, the thing is, I don't know when it changed, but it couldn't have been too far. I remember learning at school that you became a city when you got a cathedral. So it shows that even later on, it's still the church, the type of church you have in a settlement that defines what it is your settlement is. So that's an interesting news.
But like that's essentially the power of it. That you may not have ever gone to Rome, but you know that this was, there's a reason she's called the Eternal City. You only know it directly, but being linked in some direction to Rome gives a settlement gravitas. But now I was just going through a couple of my notes, but one of the very first mentions of the Irish raids is 280-290 AD during Constantine's father's trip as governor of Britain, and that's probably linked to the Great Barbarian Conspiracy, where major raids happened from 4 major tribes, including the Scoti. Now, was it a conspiracy? Nobody knows. But I think the one thing you have to kind of maybe take away from this is during this very chaotic period, during the military anarchy, which had a very few spells of peace, you probably had these independent churchmen from Britain, most likely, probably Gaul, going over to Ireland and slowly converting the people to Christianity. Now, before we go through the whole Catholic business, there was no set parameters of the church yet. So it was basically, you got 10 people on the street, every single one of them had a different reading of the Bible. The basic standard was the Torah, aka the Old Testament, the 4 books of the New Testament, and whatever little Gnostic Gospels were scattered in between. But there was no standard practice of the church. Right, the monastic settlements. Where do you think monasticism comes from? Yeah, Eastern Rome. It's an Eastern Roman practice. In the Western Church didn't have it. It was the whole idea of going to the most loneliest spot you can find to get closer to God is Eastern Christianity, which leads me, there's definitely evidence of 3 types of Christianity at work in Ireland. Around the west of Ireland, you have the Eastern Church. Now, the division between the Catholic and the Orthodox Church happened much later, but you had the Eastern practice, like you go to any place in Ireland that was called Dicer, like Dicer or D, etc. They were monastic settlements. Again, the idea is you build a little hut, stone hut or whatever, Skellig Michael. So you starve yourself, you deny yourself pleasures of the flesh to get closer to God. The second bit, you had this native, I don't like using the word because I don't believe we were, Celtic Christian church. And then you had what?
We can use that word if you want.
Oh, that's much better. I like that one.
And
then you had the Roman Church, which was formed now when we get to Constantine the Great and the Nicene Creed. That's where you get standard doctrine, and the term Catholic. Catholic means universal. In ancient Roman thinking, for somebody to be held truthful, it has to be believed by everybody. That's where that comes from. And funnily enough, I was reading a saint's life about Saint Finbar, and apparently he was a Roman Catholic saint, because the story involves that he was going down the Liffey Valley, converting people to a more organized church. So probably what was going on was you had these independent churchmen, hippies or lone wolf converters coming in, and that's probably what Patrick was. Because if you go down south here, he's barely mentioned at all. It's up north. He has more gravitas. So
that's to do with but that's later on. That's to do with church propaganda when the churches started to
not really
fight. Agree to disagree, maybe.
That's right.
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but you do start to find like the Church of Columba and the Church of Patrick, and these families start to rewrite the book on what Patrick did and what each saint has done to fit the narrative of their church, because the church is then associated to the clan, the family, the king, and that's that prestigious sort of link right there, and
no, obviously, obviously it's very hard to split the physical Patrick versus the saint. But I sent a map of my copy of my find map there to Philip, but most of the finds I could find anything to do with Rome, be it pottery, brooches, the majority of them are from the north of Ireland. So if you're a Roman Christian, I think I'll go there first. So does that insinuate, now again, this is me spitballing here, does that insinuate that there was some, I actually found another one. I found a possible Romano-British shrine up in County Antrim.
Right.
So Ned Kelly of the National Museum he hasn't said it really, but he has all but said it, is that, all the holy wells of Romano British tradition, they're not necessarily native to Ireland at all. Yeah.
Right.
So, and I know I've mentioned a whole lot, but I'll share that map again if you want to look at the finds I could find. Most of the shrines have some Roman bit in it, be it a brooch, be it a bit of pottery. Now, obviously, that's a lot to insinuate, be it on a few bits, but these were very casual find. Not all of these would be a temple, so keep like fancy temples out of the way. This is what I would like to call local religion. So if there's a local the famous eye doctor stamp from Goleen in County Tipperary was found in a holy well, and that had a stamp of the man's name, basically his prescription, dated to the 4th century. They believe Cashel, and on another report I was reading, Cashel was a Romano-British site.
Yeah, the name, isn't it? Castellum, they think it's...
Castellum is Roman fort. So now, that probably means that you had locals, served in the army, took some Roman habits with them. There's no, it's so far in the past, it's hard to, see was there any kind of wave of settlement in, but you definitely have some evidence of Roman tradition coming in. Now, are these Romanized Christians that kept, a few local traditions or passed them on to the native Irish? We don't know. There's a lot of supposition, and I freely admit that, but you definitely have, between what was happening on mainland Europe and in Britain, you have a load of independent Christian priests or bishops or whatever you want to call them coming in and giving their spin of the church to Ireland. And then when the Nicene Creed standardized religion, you probably have a bit more of a concerted effort in peacetime to say, from the church, go west, young man, or go east, or wherever. Because, let's face it, the Catholic Church is a rather controlling institution.
And even more so then, because they were trying to get grips of basically the, so I'd much having 10 wild children run off and you're trying to grab them all in together and listen to me, I'm your dad.
That's probably what it was. But again, if you're like a native tribesman in Patrick, I can imagine the scenario that Palladius is there selling the mother city of Rome, the great empire, that if you join this church, you'll be part of a greater family. You're there going, that gives me more power. And that's predominantly...
Is it possible that there was a good chunk of refugees came to Ireland as well with the arrival of the Saxons and stuff?
Possibly, but as far as I can see, no archaeological evidence has been found. It's not beyond the realm of possibility, because if you take Ptolemy's map as gospel, there were Brigantes down in Wexford, and you had Brigantes in the north of England. So, could the cousins have come over and settled in Wexford?
We know from St. Patrick's own writing that the Scotti, the Irish at the time, were not just shooting people on sight. As in, there wasn't, how St. Patrick came back into Ireland again. If St. Patrick went away and then came back into Ireland again, that means they weren't attacking Romans on sight. So I think it could be possible for refugees to come in and not be hit, as long as they played the game in once they got into Ireland, maybe.
It's not beyond the realm of possibility. But just as a side note, Richard Warner, again I'm quoting, he believed that the most Romanized site in Ireland was Wexford, because allegedly a part of a Roman military belt was found there. I have it on the map again, of unknown context or origin, I must admit, but definitely.
The thing about that site, let's pretend for a second that Ireland had accepted refugees. If they came in and they built a military site, that means that they were there to take a part of society. You know, they were just given that. Maybe they were given that land. Maybe they just, you know, Ireland really liked all this Roman stuff, so they had no problems with them building those buildings as long as they followed Irish law. Because we can see with the Scandinavians that come into Ireland during the Viking Age, when they build Dublin, Limerick, Waterford and Cork, that although people at first have this view when they were first looking at this in the 1850s during the Victorian era and stuff, they thought it was Ireland versus the Vikings, when in fact the reality is, you know, take Dublin Vikings for example, they came in, yeah, they started war with the Southern Union, but at the same time they're fully integrating into the Northern Union. They're fostering children from that place, they're marrying into the locals, and it's the same.
They're going native.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same at Cork and Limerick and Waterford. They're doing the exact same thing. Waterford, you know, marries and allies itself with Dacia. Dacia at the time were fighting Ostroga. So guess what? Waterford is now fighting Ostroga as well. So I just, from my point of view, because I do spend a lot of time looking at medieval context, it does seem that maybe, most likely, if we look at the history of the Irish, maybe they were fully taken in. The Irish did like all of their stuff and went, hey guys, you can pretty much, you know, we like all this Roman stuff, we like your Roman buildings, we like your Roman military. If you follow our law, we have no problem you doing all that stuff.
It's not beyond the realm of possibility, but sadly, unless we find the Holy Grail or, you know, a few Roman burials here, which we have, but that's a different story altogether. It's hard to tell, but
I don't know about refugees, but again, touching on what Shane said about the military, and again, just touching on what we assume or what we've been told through Irish stories and stuff. Munster, the clans in Munster claim there are branches that moved to Wales. Now, you got to remember at the time, all the Dacia, and then all the idea of the kings of Brecon and such, all Irish kings. Now, if you're having a military fort that is a Roman military fort that is stationed towards the end of the empire where they're not moving, these are local lads marrying with this migration of Irish families, integrating, adopting cultures. Now, that's not to say that these families don't move backwards and forwards, especially as generations go on. You know, we do know the Irish were heading into Northern England, into Scotland, Galloway and Argyll. You know, we do know these migrations happened, and these are all prominent areas, especially Galloway and Wales and Northern England, where you would have had large military operations with the Roman army. So it's not a far-flung fetch to think that these families are coming in, marrying a wee bit, and going back and coming in. You know, it wouldn't be as we do get very bogged down on when we think of the early medieval period on it's so expensive to move and so hard to move. But we do know that families and tradesmen and soldiers moved backwards and forwards. We wasn't just lived in an area and stayed there and just died there and, you know, that's it. No, otherwise history would be very boring.
And it certainly would. But like I freely admit, like this particular bit I'm on is a lot of supposition on my part, and you know, guesstimations. But definitely, you have, when you have like Roman life kind of disintegrating to a degree with few bits of peace from Aurelian to Diocletian, and the church is kind of has that bit of room to kind of take over a little bit the functioning of the government. And then but what's interesting enough, I should mention this very briefly, when Diocletian becomes emperor, he does away with this republican facade that was crumbling, and he's basically an absolute tyrant. He's it's called the dominate. And then and it's from there you actually get the Byzantine doctrine, which then leads to the Eastern Patriarch, because the division of Christianity, as it happened, is that originally you had a split between physical power and spiritual power. The Pope had one, the Patriarch in Constantinople, who was equal, had the other. So the Pope wasn't a temporal figure. He was a spiritual figure. He was temporal. So he had a lot of political power, whereas the patriarch was into the more spiritual side of things. So he had that division is interesting, but you can imagine these proto-Eastern Christians again to the west of Ireland with their long hair and their crappy tonsure, starving themselves to death. But what they gave, despite the fact it was a hard lifestyle, was stability. And it's the same with the Roman Church as well. Yes, we kind of go in our heads that it's monastic settlement is boring, but you're not dying. You don't have to worry about food. You don't have to worry about anything. All your job is to pray and copy books. So that's the other thing that the church would offer to, early medieval Ireland was stability. And along with that, a sense of power. And yes, you're right there, Michael, about the local families marrying in, and it became a sign of prestige. But top that proverbial cherry on the cake, you're linked to Rome. So that's the one thing you have to remember. Like all the earliest, now let me see if I get this correct. When you go to the church sites like Clonmacnoise, they have a bell tower. The bell tower is a copy from Italy. Settlements of that nature are wanting to link themselves back to Rome, either by proxy or by buildings. It's a campanella. That's it. It's a style of building. That's what the Leaning Tower of Pisa is. It's the bell tower to the cathedral next door, and that's what the Irish bell towers are. They're an homage to the mother city, Rome, to the church in Rome. So you have...
Yeah, it's so fascinating in the fact that we see when people look in at these Irish history books, the cheap old ones, History of Ireland and stuff, what they see is St.Patrick coming in, but Ireland still, they even referred to the church at the time as insular Christianity, that it's cut off and stuff, but in fact we're actually looking at the 5th century now, and it seems to be the complete reverse. This is a point where the Scotti, as they're referred to by the texts at the time, the Irish, are taking territory in Wales, and they're taking territory in Scotland. But it seems really complicated because at the same time they're still looking into Rome. They want to be Roman and stuff, and they're having their relationship with the Eastern Roman Empire as well. So not only is it, it's complicated and it's a mess and stuff, but it's what we are getting the glimpses of, the little bits of information we do have, and our imagination is going a bit wild here, and we're having a bit of theories and stuff of the little glimpse we have. But it's really fascinating that we're actually looking at the information now, and we're getting the complete reverse. We're getting an Ireland that's looking outwards and looking into Roman stuff, especially Rome, and it's like this is really interesting because we're taught at a young age that Ireland it was completely cut off like Japan during the Edo period, that it was a cut off country, nothing was going in or out. And St. Patrick came in, and then suddenly all the lights magically came on at night time. But
it's a very romantic notion, though, isn't it?
It is romantic, but at the same time, I do actually prefer this version. It's exciting. Really exciting stuff.
It's definitely exciting, and I would like to know if anyone has actually done any history on the very earliest Christian saints, because there's only, like I said to you last time, there's only one place in the world they're coming from. They're not just appearing like Thanos snapping his fingers. So interesting actually. Do you remember when the Fat Moor Psalter was found? It was in where was it? Fat Moor, County Tipperary. It was in a bog in County. Do you know what the book was wrapped in? Papyrus. Now there's only one place on earth where I know that's being made, and I don't know if it's being made in Ireland at the time.
No, I don't think it was. It's
so you
because you also have that gravestone in Kerry as well that has that Byzantine symbol in it. And that's from Eastern Europe. Sorry, not Eastern Europe. That comes from the Eastern Roman Empire with Constantinople and stuff in modern day Greece, or Turkey with Eastern both.
Turkey.
And it's very interesting that Eastern Roman Empire is so far away, and yet there seems to be massive influence coming in at that period. You have Coptic literature trying to sip in and stuff, and it's like, okay, what is going on here? And it seems to me, and Shane Kent, you're definitely the right person to ask right now. It seems that the Romans are having a conflict with each other, and they're supporting the Irish against the Romans. Is that the case?
That's a tough one. You probably like I mentioned last time, your standard Roman military policy would be to bribe one tribe to fight another tribe. So, and as I alluded to with that coin hoard in the north of Ireland, that during the Severan dynasty, that's what that was. That was a blatant bribe. And when you get to the 4th and 5th century, when you have the silver hoards coming in, they're definitely payments to Irish tribesmen who served in the army. Now, what simply was happening is that you had independent churchmen, not, kind of think of it like the Second Awakening in the United States, where people are just going, go west, young man, and convert to whatever thing you want and worship whatever you want, are coming in and just are selling. They're like salesmen, like a door-to-door salesman. They're going in and say, right, here's my version of Christianity, where we can give you stability, but you have to live in a stone hut with no fire and starve yourself to death every so often to get closer to God. I know I'm making light of it, but that's when and then when you have a mix of everything with the insular Christianity that's still paying tribute to whatever native beliefs. By and by, I don't believe we ever had Druids in this country. There's no evidence whatsoever. Just to be argumentative.
Slight glimpses though of the idea of Druids and stuff. There's slight mentions, especially going into the later Viking Age and stuff, and then you've got the whole relationship between the Fenian and stuff. No, I have to disagree with that. I think, yeah, you do have the Irish pretending they were never Druids and that Ireland was always a holy place and stuff, but I do think, especially when the majority of Druids were found in Wales and stuff, and you have that famous genocide by the Romans to the Druids in Wales, and I think Druids originated from Wales and then came over to Ireland, but I can't say that Druids were not in Ireland. No, I have to disagree with that.
The fact they can see Ireland from Anglesey, the famous Druid epicenter of Wales, and I wouldn't say that they never came. I'm not gonna. We can't really. This is probably another subject altogether. Druids in Ireland. We're doing Christian Ireland next time, but yeah, you can see Anglesey.
They are mentioned in some Christian Irish texts, but I was just being a bit of a muck stirrer. They are. I know.
If you've signed off now, come back.
But they're mentioned in Irish historiography, but they're not. If you asked a Druid in Anglesey, are you the same as an Irish Druid? They'd say, no, bloody way. A classical Druid was basically a judge, historian, an advocate, all rolled into a historian, all rolled into one. The minimum training of probably more akin to an olive in Irish thinking. They had some religious jurisdiction, but it took 20 years to train one, and they were meant not to take part in wars, marry, and to be separate from the tribe. So if you are from one tribe, you can't join anyone else. The Irish versions are not. They do everything that they're not supposed to be doing. Now, are they just taking the name to link themselves to a classical past? I don't know, but that's that. So
definitely another subject. Definitely
back to the main point anyway. Yeah, so you had the insular Christianity that was trying to take a bit of everything, and then you had the Roman Church, or the developing Roman Church, far more centralized, far more organized. Which again, like the Eastern version, the Western version gives stability. It gives purpose. It gives power. Like that's why most pagan Northern European countries joined the church, was to be linked again to Rome, linked to a city that they may have never seen, but it had such gravitas and power and reputation. You want to be part of that, and it also was a mechanism to unify. Like the first, the first king of Norway can only converted the country within a 50-year span, and then he was the first Christian king to go on crusade. So you can take the raiding out of the Viking, but you can't take the Viking out of the raiding, I suppose. So, but again, the point is, it was a political decision to probably more likely to convert. But again, that's what it offered. For all of the faults and all of the blah blah blah, it offered power, access to power, and stability, and a mechanism for you to politically unify. So that's the greatest thing that the church gave to Ireland. Now, obviously, if I was using that, if what I said was true, Ireland would have been unified a hell of a lot earlier than it was. But it did coalesce along, like Michael said, certain families and certain certain provinces. And certain provinces had certain church sites that were more powerful than others. But again, it all rolls into the whole contact with Rome, open to the mother church, to the eternal city, and so on. And even the fact that you had the most famous of Irish church sites, Clonmacnoise, to name but one, much later on, I mind, linking themselves to Rome. So I know, like I said earlier on, the context in the 1st to 3rd century was very, very iffy, but they were there. Then when you get through the crisis of the 3rd century and then Christianity's rise, you have the raiding going back and forth. But it's kind of fascinating that you had basically 3 different types of Christianity operating in the country. And then it was much later, now, when Patrick was trying to unify it all. That's what probably he was trying to do. And it was a basically lone wolf operation from him.
Look there, Philip.
Are you looking at, because we have 2 letters are definitely from Patrick, but are you looking at the folklore as a source? Because I'm assuming that you're looking at the folklore, or not the 2 letters.
Yeah. Well, a bit of everything.
Okay, so are you looking at the folklore as, because clearly you can't be looking at all the folklore as fact. Like, you must be looking at some of the folklore and going, okay, there seems to be traces of truth in the folklore.
Yeah, I did look at the Confessios, which are propaganda, like let's call a spade a spade. There's a degree of propaganda with it.
Well, yeah, degree. He kind of, 'cause he clearly did something bold. He doesn't explain what he did bold, and then he's trying to make himself look like an idiot, so they won't tell, they won't punish him.
Yeah, that he won't get spanked by the bishop.
He's clearly done something really bold, and he's like, me no better. I am sorry. Me not understand language.
Hey, lad, I'm from not Wales.
Yeah, I don't know any better. And then he's claiming that every intelligent thing he ever did was from God. It was God. Look, I'm a special boy. I'm not very intelligent. All this intelligent stuff that you're saying, that was God. God made me do all that intelligent stuff. Quite intelligent move.
Well, it probably was, but I think the problem, I think, when you're dealing with Patrick is you got to separate the saint from the man, and you also have this, and also you have to pay attention to Paul. Was it Palladius?
Yeah, but he was meant to be around the same time, a year before, technically, if you go by the annals, which I know are.
Well, it's either like the Trinity. They're either all in the same, or they were all 3 different people mushed.
Well, that's the thing, but then that's when you've got to take into account Armagh hagiography, and that is just pure propaganda by the church from the 7th, 8th, 9th century, where they are just throwing Patrick at everything. Well, he did this, and he did that, and he did this, and they're just, anyone who goes, oh, well, what about Pelagius? He never existed, and they're just scoring it's scorched earth policy with Armagh. Armagh is the epicenter, is the Canterbury of Ireland, and it is literally trying to become this epicenter of the church in Ireland.
But again,
and in doing so, it does do just.
But again, why? But why did Armagh want to be center of the church in Ireland?
Well, look who is the families in there. You've got the Enale, you've got their families all, because you've got to remember, you've got like St. Columba, who's he's from a Kinlochon family. So, you know, if Armagh linked to the Kinlowen, there's political rivalry there. I'm speculating here, but I'm just saying St. Columba was Kinlochonal, Armagh's Kinlowen area. So who's to say that the rivalry isn't just because of that as well? You know, these families constantly try to push their agenda, their sort of motive for.
I do support Michael's theory there that it was pure political argument, because Columba is the king of it. He was so bad. Remember that was it the copyright book war? Between the Northern, he's the one that started the Northern Ale, Southern Ale break. He's literally the reason why we don't have just Ale. We have Northern Ale and Southern Ale because of him. He got bloody book. He got so bad because of his political fucking mouthing off for the Northern Ale. They had to kick him off the bloody island and send him off to Iona, you know? He didn't wake up one day and say, oh, I want to go off to Iona. They physically fucking kicked him out of the country. Sorry, my language. I can beep that out later.
No, but not only that,
that's what you get for fucking being a bull boy. That's probably what happened to Patrick too.
Yeah, but that's the kind of characters you needed to push this new agenda through into Ireland. You would have needed those you don't get, you know, you look at the Romans and politicians today, and you get this populists, you know, going through telling people, you know, the right things and those are the ones that galvanize people behind you. You can't go in and just break a system being anything but different to what there is there at the time.
It seems really interesting what we're actually stumbling across, because not only are we seeing divides between the Roman, it seems to me, right, and this isn't written in fact, right, that the Romans are fighting amongst each other, and obviously you have Ireland fighting amongst each other, and you have that sudden somewhat unification with the Northern Ale, right? But it seems really interesting that we have this idea right now on YouTube and stuff that the Irish are dum-dums, they're half-naked running around in spears and stuff, when the reality is, it seems to me that the Irish are very switched on with the politicalness, and on top of that, they're playing off the Romans off of each other to take advantage of this, to attack Wales and Scotland, because you know, we think, they're just overwhelming Rome and taking it over. There's actually not that many Scotti. There really isn't. Even the Romans commented about that. When they beat them in one battle, I have to remember what the name of the battle is and stuff, and I'll post it up below. But they beat them in one battle, and then suddenly the Romans are mounting off that they killed every single Scotti. Every single Irishman on the Isle of Ireland who invaded England. And they wouldn't be half wrong, because the maximum number that the Irish are able to summon in the Tudor period, which is, you know, a point where there's a population is suddenly booming up, is only 8,000. You know, Ireland isn't able to produce that many men, and for Ireland to be successful, especially when they're taking on Wales and stuff, they'd have to they have to be switched on. You know, so this idea that the Irish are dum-dum, it seems to me that the Irish were actually really switched on to what was going on around them, you know, and you can see that with the finds and stuff in Ireland. You have Roman pottery and stuff, so it seems to me that the Irish are switched on enough to actually play the Game of Thrones with the Romans, you know, and that's why you have Christianity coming into Ireland and stuff, that the Irish are playing the Game of Thrones. And on top of that, we're not finding Western Roman, it's Eastern Roman. It seems to be constant Eastern Roman coming in, which means they must be really playing the Game of Thrones with the Romans. You know?
Well, I think from like the classicist in the room point of view, the only way I could see that being done is if they were federale troops, because the Western Eastern Roman armies were so starved of manpower. What they would have done was they would have taken on literal entire tribe loads of people. Said, right, lads, you're Roman soldiers. We promise you land if you fight for us. That's why at Adrianople they lost, because they were abusing the Goths so much. They just said, "Nah, fuck you, we're done."
Another bleak moment there.
And then you had that with even Attila the Hun. It was a Roman army in the loosest sense of the word. It was mostly Goth Germanic peoples in that army. So maybe they joined a federal, you know, it could have been just a raid for the sake of being a raid, and then you had 3 other tribes coming in just at the same time. So sheer dumb luck or coincidence. It probably, my gut feeling, it was just locally based. A local chieftain or his retinue coming over to Roman Britain, trading with people that they knew for years, blah blah blah, getting news of this religion called Christianity. And it could have been, now for all I know, there could have been a trader sailing from somewhere in Ireland down to the Mediterranean with their goods, which is not unlikely, because in Goron's ring fort in Cork, they found very late Roman amphorae, 6th century amphorae, which again probably aided a little bit with Christian. I think there was a Christian church there. I could be wrong, but they're usually they were full of wine, and the only institution in Ireland that would be drinking this stuff would probably be chieftains who could afford it, or the church. So you definitely, it is not illogical to assume that there was, people people definitely, obviously fighting the Romans, dealing with the Romans, but manipulating them to that degree, if there was if there was enough mass of people to do it, I could see it.
Yeah, it's just me throwing out theories and stuff. Obviously, that's a massive long shot. The only solid ground we really have is that it was through trade, raids, and that you had a few Scotty Irish of the period going in and serving in the Roman, various legions or whatever you want to call them and stuff. That's the only three things that we can actually probably argue. So my theory with that is kind of a super long shot, but I just kind of want to shoot it out there anyway, just because the Irish are taking ground in Wales, and that's an achievement, because the Romans are not easy to fight.
I would flip it and actually say it's more the church doing it the other way and manipulating families here, which is probably my theory on it, because and it's seen with any empire, and Shane said it there, the Roman policy was to bribe one tribe against another, and the Roman Church is the baby of the Roman Empire. And I used to say the policy wasn't to get one family to fight another, and that's why you see in the church with the Kilconnell of Columba and Armagh, and you'd have sort of like the Forbes and Sligo and the Harveys and stuff. These are all families that are heirs to saints. They would call themselves Corvin, and that's a really bad pronunciation of Irish, I'm sorry. Who used to say that the main church, the Western Church, the Roman Church, realizing that it's up against these rivals of three other rivals in Ireland, isn't feeding money and people and resources into these other families to try and bring up the power of the Roman Church within Ireland. So it's given support to those families rather than support to, maybe, I don't know, if the old Gormleys who are in a classical family could have been insular. I'm speculating, but I think it was more the other way around.
Actually, I can actually support that, because I can't remember the Pacific speech and stuff, but there is a speech from the later Roman period where the Romans basically say that to Christianize a area is equal to back in the day when the Romans used to physically take the area, and for them to Christianize the world would be an even greater accomplishment than physically taking over the planet, And so it would be interesting. I can't remember that bloody speech or anything, so take that with a grain of salt, really. But my main point being, I can actually imagine that for the Romans to support the Aeneal and have the Aeneal take over Ireland, a Christian kingdom, would be a victory for Rome in itself. I can actually imagine that in my point of view, Michael.
Yeah, and like that again, like Patrick was still, like, the West hadn't fallen yet, and Britain was still a province. So if they were that big of a threat, it wouldn't be beyond the realm of possibility. So like basically, when you get to just to kind of recap on kind of the stuff I was touching on, when you get like to the 200s to the 400s AD, you definitely are seeing far more concrete, contact or even archaeology from Rome to Britain, because even in Newgrange, they had little pendants. Now, I didn't show you this, but there was a pendant of a coin from the late Emperor Arcadius, and in the late Empire, it was a very common practice again to give tokens of affection to a friend of Rome. So again, like that type of policy was quite subtle, but it was there. So and then I think most of the major influence was religious, definitely religious, and by extension, political as well. Like I mentioned, the three possible types of Christianity and the early saints of the church that obviously had to come from Rome. Now, when I mean by Rome, obviously the East and the West. You know, we're all equal, baby. One just speaks Greek. So you have these early Christian, saints coming into the south of Ireland. They're converting to the south of Ireland. So maybe is that the kernel of the population? When we go back to the 400s, when Palladius is saying, right, send a bishop down to to the Irish who believe in Christ, because conversion doesn't happen very quickly. Although, well, actually, there is a very famous one. Was it the Emperor Galerius in the 230s or 240s had signed a peace called the Small Peace of the Church, and within 60 years, the population of Christians shot up from 10% to 50%.
But real Christians, like real Christians.
But bear in mind, the most populous parts of the empire were the east, so they were mostly in the Eastern Empire, not in the West.
Yeah.
So so you definitely have that 100%, and I would argue that was coming up even to the 19th century, because if you looked at the famous rebellion, the 1916 rebellion, and you read some of the speeches, not only are they kind of evoking the blood sacrifice of Jesus Christ, they're also evoking Leonidas at Thermopylae. If you go to the lyrics to A Nation Once Again, his fire was in my red, ancient free men from Greece and Rome, who bravely stood 300 men and free men. So the love of the classics and anything to do with the classics is well founded in Rome. It probably was not physical, but more of a a spiritual sense.
You touched it. That brings it. I love saying it. Brings it around a full circle in the Roman idea of their institutes of their gods, and that the fact that it worked for it works. The empire stood with the god. The gods gave us the empire, and it's worked before, so we'll keep using it. And it's almost like the Roman Church has adopted that, and that it's worked before, and we'll just keep using it, and that's why the classics keep coming back again. So it is funny how the Roman Church has mimicked so much more of the Roman Empire in its dealings than it probably let on.
It's absolutely really amazing. I have so much. My brain is trying to digest so much information right now. But sadly, we have to finish up now. Shane, do you have anything to conclude on there?
Well, my last 2 cents, I suppose, is I'm still of the opinion that classical archaeology and the Roman archaeology of Ireland is horribly, horribly understudied. Yeah. It is massively improved, especially with the late Iron Age and Roman Ireland project, but it's still a bit of a dirty subject, because of the nationalism of Ireland and the fact.
It's frustrating in the fact that we've gone into a period where we want to advertise ourselves as great traders, especially between the European Union and our great allies, America and Canada, and yet we seem to be stuck in the mud that we want to continue this fake romance, really, that we were naked people running around an island that were uncivilized. When I say it like that, I can't really even see the romance in it, but regardless, why at this point, especially when we have such interesting history, especially in the 5th century, then we go into the period, the golden age of Ireland, where Ireland goes back into Europe, re-educates Europe, pulls Europe out of the Dark Age, the gutter of the Dark Ages, and then it moves into the Viking period, where it is not the Irish versus the Vikings. In fact, it's the classic Irish banter of one clan fighting another, and that's the peak of Irishness. And then we move into a period where you have the Norman invasion and so on and so forth. And it's just annoying that we're getting bogged down with this silly little romance that continues. We need to really start investing in actual Irish history. It just seems silly.
Yeah, it's a very neglected bit when you get kind of like from the 4th, 5th to 6th centuries, and there is stuff there, but it's basically you can't sell it. People can understand. Like I did my master's degree in museum studies, and the first thing we were taught was the authorized heritage discord, basically the official story of a state. So the official story of a state was, oh, Ireland is poor, we lived in whitewashed houses with thatched roofs, yada, 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 yada. People can understand that. People can feel sympathetic to it. But yet, if I told you, do you know the oldest copy of Virgil's Aeneid was made by an Irish monk? Would you believe me?
I would, just because we are quite educated going into the golden age of Ireland. It was a monastic copy of Virgil's Aeneid dated to the 9th century.
Yeah. Mm.
So you have someone copying a book that they don't know what it's about, probably could read it but didn't understand it, but you still have the classics being copied down by an Irish monk, probably sending it to another monastic settlement somewhere in Britain or somewhere on the continent. So even then they were the love of the classics was there, or the appreciation at least of classical knowledge was there. And
that's another thing that's part of my argument. I know I was supposed to conclude like 5 minutes ago and stuff, but it's important to point out that when the Irish do go back into Europe and we do re-educate Europe, that these monks can speak Latin. So somebody had to have taught them, although it's the Irish version of Latin, someone had to have taught them Latin. People continue to have this idea that the Irish, suddenly the light came, St.Patrick came into Ireland, the light magically came on, we had this golden age of saints and scholars, and then the Vikings came and it blew up, it just exploded, and that was the end of it, but the reality is I think personally, and this is my personal view, and I know it seems to be against the modern media, I fucking turn into a rebel, I have, the rebel of history. But it seems to be that actual history is way more fascinating. Don't get me wrong, it's way more complicated, like really complicated, which I have no problems with because I generally do love medieval history. So getting buried into this is amazing. But at the same time, it is frustrating when you've got people saying, no, that's mud huts. We lived in mud huts, and that's it. No one came to Ireland. St. Patrick came to Ireland once, and that was it. And the Vikings ruined everything. 800 years, and that's it. That's what you get of medieval history. It's like, that's not what happened. It was way better than that. Stop.
But again, it's an easy thing to digest. This is the entire problem. Like everyone knows about 1916, for example, but 1798 is barely mentioned. And it's probably barely mentioned because the majority of the people of 1798 came from the Presbyterian tradition, which does not fit into our narrative, even though if you looked into it, Wolfe Tone was doing his damnedest to fit everybody into it because he was printing stuff not only in Irish, not only in English, and Ulster Scots as well.
Yeah. Problem
So,
with 1798 as well is it is
I plugged my thing back in there, so I'm probably because
I got pure buzzing across the screen. I was like, "Oh my god, my ears!"
You're right. It was a bit of a bloody mess, but still,
it's
it is
really disturbing to read, and it's disturbing. We'll just leave it there because it is. And for a modern audience, it is a bit too disturbing, very disturbing, and it's very complicated to talk about, especially with recent events up in Northern Ireland. It is really complicated and really raw as well. So I can see why, avoid that conversation. Like, it's easier to talk about 1916. Yeah, they were all put up against the wall and shot, but the stuff that happened in 1798, there's a line and people went completely, I won't say who, but they went way past the line and then continued going past the line. I was even saying talking about 1798 to the wife the other day, and it's just, I said to myself, thank God I cover medieval history, because it's so much more nicer and polite to talk about than modern history.
You're probably right, but like you're right. But all I was kind of alluding to is that it doesn't, 98 doesn't fit in with a narrative, and the fact that I could say, oh yeah, we there was Roman contact from the first third well into the 5th century. It was Eastern Roman Christians were the first, were one of the first to come in. Then we had the Western. It's too complicated. It's too vague, and it doesn't sell. If I found in the morning an entire Roman legion, castra in Cork, for example, with all of the irrelevant archaeology, that is easy to digest. That is easy to tell the public about that. But if I was trying to tell someone about, the traditions of monasticism brought over from the Eastern Roman Empire to here, it's you kind of see what I'm alluding to.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I've been looking at these finds for quite some time, and it's always frustrated me that people haven't highlighted it, especially the one in Kerry, because the find in Kerry, for me personally, that Eastern symbol from the Eastern Roman Empire is so in your face, and yet no one ever highlights it. It's just the narrative is St.Patrick came to Ireland, and that's that. On saying that, thanks very much, guys. I know Shane is ready to get more information out there and stuff, and I have to put the breakdown because we've gone way overboard.
Oops.
As always, we have to get you back on, Shane. We won't be able to do it next week because next week we are covering. We're going to have a really special guest on next week who's a really famous author and stuff, so we're going to have him on next week.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because we're covering 12th
I'm
century
intrigued.
Ireland.
I'm intrigued now.
Oh, yeah. Just before the coming of the Normans, so we're covering that next week. This is all news to Michael because I forgot to tell Michael. Michael's like, what's going on? Yeah, I forgot to tell you, we're having an author on next week. He's kind of a big name. He's covering 12th century Ireland, which in itself is a pretty big topic, but yeah. But looking forward to it. Michael's just going to be set back. Well, I have no notes for this week, so I'll just watch you guys.
12th century Ireland. Well, I'm going to say it was a century, and it was probably the 12th.
So, yeah, that's pretty much. So, lads, so make sure you have that. Definitely ring the bell button. If you don't ring the bell button, you're not going to get this straight away. And YouTube, I'm going to actually post up a video of why YouTube doesn't like me. So make sure to ring that bell button. It's Instagram all over again. I got kicked off Instagram because I made a post on the Battle of Bloody Bay. So I'm as bad as 1798, where I see the line and then I go way past that line. And I think the Battle of Bloody Bay on Instagram was definitely that line for me. Regardless, I think YouTube are seeing potential in me, and are trying to stamp me out soon rather than later.
Keep pushing and you'll get that extra 3.
That's the plan. More blood and guts, I can't wait for the comments. I cannot wait for the comments in this video. Regardless, guys, thanks very much for the support. It is your support that's keeping me going. I've literally become the rebel, and I never even planned this happening. These were meant to be civilized podcasts every week, and it's just for me and the actual system. My normal people are just like regular fellas that just sit there and watch the videos, and yet the actual system is looking at me and going, oh yeah, we have a troublemaker on our hands. Look at him, folding our hands and talking about history. Oh, gee. The battle
have you filled in the YouTube survey yet?
That's what I'm making a video. I'm gonna comment about the feedback I got off them. But yeah, rebel without a cause. Look at them. Because it says although my wife watches the YouTube stuff, and I know other female friends actually watch my YouTube, according to the algorithm, it's 100% males. So basically, we're a bunch of old fellas that sit there in the corner and we talk about history and stuff. That's basically what the algorithm believes. Although I actually have female friends that watch me and stuff, but they're put down as male. So a bunch of
Sounds like a reenactment event, to be honest.
And the algorithm's like, whoa, gee, troublemakers here. Oh, troublemaker, get the broomstick out. We'll try to chase them out of the building. So anyway, guys, thanks for the support. It's your support that's keeping this channel going. This channel right now is not getting paid. I'm not getting paid nothing. So it's your support that's keeping me going. Not until June 26th, and then we find out again what kind of rebels we are. Yeah, thanks very much, guys. Definitely ring the bell button so you can find out about 12th century Ireland next week, and when we get Shane back on the channel again, because I'd love to get Shane on. Butler, Denton with the Vikings and stuff. Definitely we'll get more guests in and we'll do more wild stuff, because we got even more stuff coming in. I definitely do not want to end this channel, because we're just, myself and Michael are having way too much fun. It's too much fun. I've gone way over my time. So thanks very much, guys. And always, ring the bell button, like and subscribe. Yeah, that's basically it. And I'm going to find the exit button and I'm going to leave so I can have a private talk with Shane. Thanks very much, guys. Bye.